This is Singapore Tonight.
Good evening, I'm Ottilie Edwards. Tonight's top stories. The economy on track to grow by 4 to 6% this year. This comes after it shrank 5.4% in 2020 in Singapore's worst ever recession since independence. Singapore's overall merchandise trade expected to perform better than previously forecast. Authorities cite a pickup in global oil prices. Emerging stronger together. Well, that's the theme of the upcoming budget. It will focus on how Singapore can come out of the COVID-19 crisis stronger. And commemorating total defence, which has guided Singapore in its fight against COVID-19 through acts of solidarity. Public servant arrested over a leak of police lookout message on Tampines stabbing suspect. The arrest has been made under the Official Secrets Act.
I'm Dawn Tan. In the region tonight, Myanmar's military lays out punishments for protesters, including up to 20 years in jail. It also extends the detention of ousted civilian leader Aung San Suu Kyi. A majority of Japanese businesses polled say they want the Tokyo Olympic Games to be cancelled or postponed.
I'm Elizabeth Nyo with your Asia Business Update. Private home sales in Singapore last month hit a 2-year high. Plus, Japan's economy shrinks for the first time in more than a decade.
Well, Singapore is sticking to its previous GDP growth forecast of between 4 and 6% for this year. Well, that's despite a recession last year and new coronavirus variants that could shut borders for much longer around the world. The Trade and Industry Ministry says it looked at factors that could spur recovery at home and abroad. For instance, faster vaccine rollouts in certain advanced economies like the US and EU could mean population immunity by the second half of this year. At the same time, Singapore's COVID-19 situation is under control, with mass vaccination also underway. But because of a surge in global cases slowing the reopening of countries, the ministry says the recovery ahead will be uneven.
Outward-oriented sectors such as manufacturing and wholesale trade are projected to benefit from the pickup in external demand. However, tourism and aviation-related sectors are likely to see a weaker recovery due to the slower-than-anticipated lifting of global travel restrictions, while consumer-facing sectors such as retail and food and beverage are expected to recover this year. They are not likely to return to pre-COVID levels by end of 2021 because of the slower recovery in visitor arrivals.
Singapore's economy shrank by 5.4% last year. It beat a previous advance estimate of minus 5.8%. It came out better than the government's forecast range of between minus 6 and minus 6.5%. Still, it was the first full-year contraction in 2 decades and the worst recession since independence. Budget support measures worth close to $100 billion were rolled out to save jobs and livelihoods. An interim report says so far the measures have halved the impact of COVID-19 on GDP growth.
Singapore's overall merchandise trade is expected to perform better than earlier forecast. Enterprise Singapore says it's now expected to grow between 2 and 4% this year, citing a pickup in global oil prices.
The forecast is up from November's projection of 1 to 3% growth. Total merchandise trade declined 5.2% last year, reaching about $970 billion. This due to a contraction in oil trade amid lower oil prices. But experts say improved oil prices since then will provide some support.
One positive aspect for Singapore's trade outlook is reflation. So prices of commodities have been rising over the past few months. I think that's expected to boost the values of total trade for Singapore. So that's likely to support, for instance, the commodity exports as well as oil exports for Singapore.
Experts say the forecast upgrade is also in line with a recovery in global activity, with the International Monetary Fund saying it expects trade volumes to grow by 8% globally. They added that Singapore's merchandise trade will also benefit from stimulus packages, which its key trading partners are expected to roll out. Meanwhile, Enterprise Singapore is maintaining its forecast for non-oil domestic exports at between 0 to 2%, citing economic uncertainties and uneven recovery. Still, despite 2020 being Singapore's worst ever recession, NODX grew by 4.3%, reversing an almost 10% fall the previous year. That's supported by growth in exports of electronics products as well as non-electronics items. Electronics exports grew 4.9% after a massive 22.5% contraction in 2019. This as work-from-home trends increased demand for chips, disk media and telecom equipment. Meantime, non-electronics exports grew by 4.1% due to demand for pandemic-related pharmaceuticals and non-monetary gold.
Riding on the upswing of the electronic cycle and also on the huge investment and money flowing into the pharmaceutical industry definitely benefited Singapore. And in 2021, we do think that the general structural trend for electronic cycle is positive, and with the huge vaccine production and distribution going on, it should benefit the pharmaceutical industry as well.
Economists say the forecasts reflect authorities' cautious optimism for exports to remain supportive of GDP growth in 2021.
Well, Singapore's upcoming budget will be named Emerging Stronger Together. It will focus on how the country can come out of the COVID-19 crisis stronger and forge partnerships to meet the challenges as one people. Deputy Prime Minister Heng Swee Keat shared this in a Facebook post a day before he delivers the budget statement. Well, he says that Singapore must find new ways to innovate and transform the economy, strengthen the social compact and support those with greater needs. He also highlights the importance of tackling climate change, all while continuing to be prudent in spending. Singapore will end the financial year with a record budget deficit. Mr. Heng explains that the country was able to fund this deficit by tapping on past reserves built up by earlier generations. And he warns that Singapore's fiscal situation will continue to be tight in the coming years. And of course, CNA will bring you Singapore's Budget 2021 live tomorrow. Coverage begins from 2:30 p.m. Singapore-Hong Kong time. And you can also expect analysis of the key announcements.
Meantime, MPs will discuss safeguards against terror attacks and how arms and explosive laws can be tightened. It comes after a Singaporean Christian teen was nabbed for planning to kill Muslims at 2 mosques last month. The topic of education on race and religion among younger Singaporeans will also be raised. In light of almost daily COVID-19 imported cases, MPs are interested to know whether certain foreigners will be required to get travel insurance or perhaps barred from entering the country. Other questions include whether there are ways to prevent speculation-based trading and recourse for victims of illegal bank transactions.
Youths and working adults between 20 and 39 years old are more likely to get scammed. This could be due to their poor cyber hygiene, such as opening emails and links from unknown sources. Those were among the findings from a national survey done by Home Team Behavioural Sciences Centre. Well, the online survey involved over 4,000 participants, and it was conducted between August 2019 and September 2020. Respondents shared their scam experiences, attitudes and behaviours, as well as perception of prevention initiatives. Now, 6 in 10 respondents said that they had encountered scams. 7%, or over 290 respondents, fell prey to scammers. Now, of the victims, nearly half of them were between 20 and 39. Well, these young adults were more likely to click on pop-up advertisements or sign up for free limited-time trial offers, which makes them more vulnerable to scams. About half of the victims also had poor knowledge of safe online practices. For example, they believed that authorities will send them SMSs or emails with links to verify information.
So actually we have been looking at different programs that we can actually outreach to the youth through our volunteer groups, through the schools, and we also have, in terms of the medium that we are going to outreach to them, we actually have also looked at other mediums such as TikTok, social media, so that we can actually have a greater reach to this group. We also are looking at ambassador programs to reach out to them so that they can spread the message of scam prevention tips to others.
Well, over 90% of respondents did not get cheated due to various reasons, and one of them is because they are not online often. And for this particular group, more than a third of them are seniors.
A public servant has been arrested for allegedly sharing classified information on a stabbing incident that took place in Tampines last Wednesday. The 37-year-old man allegedly took a photograph of a police lookout message about the suspect of the stabbing incident. He then shared it via WhatsApp with a friend who was not authorized to receive the information. His friend forwarded the photograph, which resulted in it being widely circulated on social media and messaging apps. For the offence of wrongful communication of information under the Official Secrets Act, the public servant could be fined a maximum of $2,000 and jailed up to 2 years. Another public servant was arrested in June for sharing classified information on Singapore's post-circuit breaker plans. 3 others were also arrested in April for leaking COVID-19 related information. There are 9 new COVID-19 cases in Singapore, all of them imported, and all have been placed on stay-home notice on arrival in Singapore. There are no new community infections, and the national tally now stands at 59,809.
A British man and his Singaporean wife have pleaded guilty to breaching COVID-19 regulations. The man was serving his stay-home notice at Ritz-Carlton Millenia Hotel when the offence was committed. Nigel Skeer spent the night with his then-fiancée in a different room at the hotel. He also breached the rules on several other occasions, like loitering along the corridor outside his room twice and leaving his room 3 times without a mask. The couple will return to court next week. They could be fined a maximum of $10,000 and jailed for up to 6 months for each offence. A civil rights activist has been fined $8,000 for multiple offences, including organising an illegal public assembly on an MRT train back in 2017. Jalvan Wam was also convicted for vandalism and refusing to sign his statement to the police. All 3 charges were related to an illegal gathering he organised to commemorate the 30th anniversary of Operation Spectrum, which resulted in 22 people being arrested.
Hello there. In business tonight, more than 1,600 new private homes were sold in January. That's an increase of more than 30% over December and 2.5 times the number of units moved in January 2020. It is also the highest monthly sales notched since July 2018. Analysts say the strong demand was anchored by 2 new launches, in particular Romanton Park, that's located near Kent Ridge, and The Reef at King's Dock, located near the harbourfront area. Those 2 launches accounted for more than half of total sales in the month. Analysts say the rise in demand may also be a reaction to potential cooling measures, with more hoping to jump into the market before possible restrictions are introduced.
Some buyers, they could be rushing in to secure units now ahead of possible property curbs, especially those who were sitting on the fence. They've decided to buy a unit now because their buying eligibility or borrowing limits could be affected by the new cooling measures. Some buyers may feel that it would be better to buy a unit sooner rather than later because prices of homes may likely rise as the global economy, especially Singapore's economy, is expected to pick up further this year.
Well, for more insights, we're joined by Vijay Natarajan. He's a real estate and REITs analyst from RHB Bank Singapore. But Vijay, this demand comes despite economic gloom. What is driving it? I mean, besides the anticipation of potential cooling measures?
I think there are a few fundamental factors at work here. First of all, I think the most key factor which is driving the property market is the ultra-low interest rate environment, as well as the government, as well as central bank stimulus measures. This is a very powerful factor for real estate as a sector. That's why it's not only in Singapore, you are seeing across globally, UK, US, Hong Kong, property prices are still going up. That's from the international point of view, the low interest rate environment. Locally also, we are seeing a strong HDB resale market and HDB upgraders moving from HDB resale market and buying their condominiums as the upgraded market. Again, in the economic front, the impact has been uneven. While some sectors like tourism as well as aviations have hit hard, there are other sectors which are doing quite well, which includes technologies and healthcare sectors, etc. So the impact has also been uneven, and rightly so, market also reinforces itself. So as market goes up, there are buyers who are sitting in the sidelines are also entering into the market. So it has been a confluence of factors, with ultra low interest rate being the key driver for all this.
And Vijay, what is the outlook for the private home sales then? Will there be any upcoming launches you think that will get home buyers excited?
I think many of the big launches or the units with more than 1,000 units have been launched, but there are few launches which are across the market which buyers are waiting out for, in my view, which includes Martin Modern, which is in the high-end segment. You also have Irwell Hill Residences. You also have Liang Court's redevelopment projects. These are some of the key projects in the near term, I think would keep market excited. In general, I think demand has been resilient. Buyers are discerning. I mean, they are not buying any other projects. They are taking a careful approach, and they are taking their potential approach in terms of how much attractiveness of the projects, and making a careful decision in my view at this point of time.
And these UAE flash estimates, they show that private home prices were at their steepest quarterly increase since July 2018. And that's also before the cooling measures hit. So with that in mind, are we expecting to see cooling measures implemented soon?
Definitely. I think the possibilities or the chances of cooling measures being implemented has increased. Government has clearly articulated that they are taking a very careful look at the property market. And I think for government perspective, the key for them is price increase, not much of a volume per se. So they would be taking a careful approach in terms of close watch in terms of how much the prices are increasing. Government has clearly said that if prices run ahead of fundamentals, we are ready to step into the market. So yes, the possibility has increased, I would say, in terms of implementing future cooling measures in the near term.
All right, thank you so much, Vijay Natarajan from RHB Bank Singapore. Japan's pandemic-hit economy shrank for the first time in more than a decade last year. It was down 4.8% from the year before. And the country ended 2020 on a strong note thanks to a pickup in consumption, exports, and government spending. The world's third largest economy grew 12.7% on year in the fourth quarter. That's when government support measures of about $3 trillion started providing relief. That's the second straight quarter of growth. The better-than-expected forecast data helped Tokyo's Nikkei 225 break 30,000 for the first time in more than 3 decades. Analysts warn that the near-term outlook could be bumpy. Fresh virus restrictions are threatening to dampen domestic consumption. Borders are also still closed to tourists, with less than 6 months to go before the postponed Olympics. Thailand's economy shrank at its fastest pace in over 2 decades as COVID-19 gutted the tourism industry and exports. Last year's 6.1% contraction was the worst since the 1997 Asian financial crisis. The ongoing anti-government protests are also weighing on growth. Now, officials expect the economy to expand at a much slower pace this year. They forecast a 2.5 to 3.5% growth, down from the 3.5 to 4.5% growth previously estimated. Partial lockdowns have hit the economy hard. Some 40 million tourists were expected to arrive in 2020, but international air travel was halted. Meantime, the Thai cabinet has approved an additional $1.2 billion of stimulus. The assistance will offer 4,000 baht, or about $134 each, to nearly 9.3 million low-income workers. The new relief comes on the heels of a series of measures, including a $1.7 billion cash injection and tax incentives in the fourth quarter, followed by cash handouts of $7 billion for about 31 million people. Indonesia's export volumes jumped more than 12% on year to $15 billion. The increase comes on the back of rising shipments of palm oil, coal and copper. The latest exports data had, however, missed expectations. Economists forecast a 13.6% increase in exports for January. Imports remain weak amid coronavirus restrictions. It was down 6.5% on year to $13 billion. As exports surge faster than imports, Indonesia has posted a bigger than expected trade surplus in January at nearly $2 billion. Australia's Seven West Media has become the first major news outlet to strike a licensing deal with Google. It will allow its content to be hosted on Google News Showcase. It did not disclose terms. The Australian government is pushing ahead with proposed new rules to force tech giants like Google and Facebook to pay media companies for content. Both tech giants have slammed the move. A proposed law aims to address the loss of advertising revenue from traditional media companies to online ones. Luxury car brand Jaguar has joined the race to roll out clean energy vehicles. It's planning to produce only electric vehicles from 2025. The brand is also looking to restructure its non-manufacturing operations in the UK. Meanwhile, the Tata Motors' own Jaguar Land Rover Group aims to be net zero on carbon emissions by 2039. And Nissan has denied it is in talks with Apple to develop self-driving cars. This follows a report that the iPhone maker had approached Nissan about a tie-up for the project. The Japanese auto giant says while the company is not in talks with Apple, it is always open to exploring partnerships to speed up industry transformation. Nissan shares in Tokyo slid nearly 3% amid the developments. Well, that's your business update for now. Back to you, Dawn.
Thanks very much, Liz. ERP charges will go up by $1 starting next Monday at 10 gantries along 3 expressways. And that's to manage congestion during morning peak hours. These include 6 gantries along the CTE and 3 along the AYE. The remaining gantry is on the KPE. There continues to be no ERP charges on other expressways and arterial roads. Updating tonight's top stories, the economy is on track to grow by 4 to 6% this year. This comes after it shrank 5.4% in 2020 in Singapore's worst ever recession since independence. Emerging stronger together. That's the theme of the upcoming budget. It will focus on how Singapore can come out of the COVID-19 crisis stronger. And commemorating total defence, which has guided Singapore in its fight against COVID-19 through acts of solidarity.
Myanmar's military has laid out punishments for protesters, including jail terms of up to 20 years. Well, despite an overnight internet shutdown and stronger military presence, people are still protesting on the streets. At the same time, the detention of Aung San Suu Kyi has been extended. She is expected to appear in court later this week.
A stronger military presence on the streets has not stopped defiant protesters from gathering in Myanmar cities for a 10th straight day. The fresh protests followed the extension of ousted leader Aung San Suu Kyi's detention.
Social media
The internet connection is back up and running after a total shutdown, taking Myanmar almost entirely offline for at least 8 hours. The information blackout has fueled fears of a military crackdown. Armored vehicles, water cannon, and trucks have also been seen rolling into Yangon. More soldiers have also been seen on the streets.
ဒီနေ့ဆိုရင်လည်းကျွန်တော်တို့အရင်ပြနေကြပုံစံနဲ့မတူဘဲနဲ့ရဲကားမဟုတ်ဘဲနဲ့စစ်ကားတွေပါရောက်နေပါတယ်။သူတို့ဘက်ကဒီဗဟိုဘဏ်နဲ့ပတ်သက်ပြီးတော့လုံခြုံရေးကိုတအားတင်းကျပ်ထားပုံရပါတယ်ခင်ဗျ။ဘာကြောင့်တင်းကျပ်ထားလဲဆိုတော့ဗဟိုဘဏ်ကကြတော့ကျွန်တော်တို့နိုင်ငံကြီးရဲ့ငွေကြေးလက်မှတ်မှုရန်တရားကြီးမှာအသက်သွေးကြောဖြစ်နေတဲ့အတွက်အဲ့ဒီဗဟိုဘဏ်ရန်တရားကြီးရပ်တန့်သွားမှာဆိုလို့ကိုသူတို့တွေဒီသူတို့ကာဗာလုပ်တဲ့အနေနဲ့ဗဟိုဘဏ်ရှိမှာစစ်တပ်တစ်ခုလုံးကိုတက်ဆွဲထားတဲ့အပြင်ကျွန်တော်တို့တင့်ကားတွေပါပါနေပါတယ်။
Protesters around the country have vowed to press on with their civil disobedience campaign, demanding for the civilian government to be restored. More than 400 people have been arrested since the coup.
These rules, these new laws really target the ongoing protests as well as the civil disobedience movement. For instance, if you now go out to protest on the streets and you hold a card that says, for instance, down with the army, then you face 20 years jail. If you disrupt a government's servant's work, for instance, a public healthcare worker or a bank worker, then you face 7 years jail. That, of course, can be linked to the ongoing civil disobedience movement where people are calling for strikes. And, of course, in recent days, we've seen how citizens are banding together to resist arrest or to resist the security forces' request for them to start work. And if they do that now, they risk 20 years jail. Now, if we take a step back and look at what's been introduced so far, the military government has given itself wider powers to arrest without needing any witness, or to detain a person longer without needing a court order, or to go into a person's house or building to search without needing a warrant. Now, on a local level, the authorities are also trying to stop people from harboring fugitives. So, for instance, if you have people staying overnight at your house, they are from out of town or they're not in your household, you will have to report that to the authorities, or that would constitute an offence.
The UK variant of the coronavirus has made its way to New Zealand. Auckland has just gone through day one of a 72-hour lockdown. Authorities there are hopeful that it won't have to be extended.
The streets of Auckland are largely empty as the city's 2 million people stay home under lockdown again. With businesses and schools closed, the only crowds seen are at coronavirus testing centres. New Zealand is rushing to find out how the highly contagious UK variant of COVID-19 entered its shores. It's been detected in 2 of the country's 3 community cases, all belonging to the same family. The initial focus is on the mother's workplace, a company providing laundry services to international flights because of what authorities call obvious connections to the border. But they aren't ruling out other possibilities.
We're already reaching out to those international airlines to see whether or not they have results from any of their air crew that could be a match, and equally reaching out to our overseas counterparts that do sequence passengers who disembark and go into isolation at other destinations. So, for instance, in Australia, to see if we can find a match there.
Authorities say testing of the family's close contacts has so far found no other cases. That's raised hopes the lockdown will end within 3 days as planned. At the same time, the country's first batch of vaccines has arrived. 60,000 Pfizer-BioNTech jabs will go to frontline workers like airline and hotel staff, nurses and border officials. It will be rolled out from Saturday following quality checks.
2 million people in Vietnam will be ordered to stay home for 2 weeks from tomorrow. The northern province of Hai Duong has become the center of a new coronavirus outbreak, and residents will only be allowed to head out for essentials. Workers at factories and production can continue with their jobs, but gatherings of more than 2 people will be banned. Schools, bars, restaurants and karaoke lounges will be shut. Vietnam's latest outbreak has been linked to the new, more contagious variants of COVID-19. Hanoi and Ho Chi Minh have both ordered schools closed for the rest of the month.
Britain's new mandatory hotel quarantine rule has come into force. All citizens and permanent residents arriving from high-risk countries will have to self-isolate for 10 days. They will have to pay for it themselves. During that time, they'll have to take several COVID-19 tests, and the rule aims to prevent new strains from spreading in the country. At the same time, Prime Minister Boris Johnson says that he will soon make a decision on how fast England can exit its lockdown. 15 million of its most vulnerable people have had their first dose of the COVID-19 vaccine. From this week, the vaccine program will be expanded to more groups. Malaysian Prime Minister Muhyiddin Yassin will unveil a handbook for the country's COVID-19 immunisation plan tomorrow. Mass vaccinations will begin later this month. And it comes as new coronavirus cases in the country continue to stay above the 3,000 mark daily. Melissa Go with this report.
Parent Azlan Arwif can't wait for the vaccine rollout in Malaysia. Teachers, he said, should be among the first to get vaccinated so that children can return to school sooner than later.
Yeah, I'm confident now because everybody has to play the part and I have to trust the government. It's being used throughout the world, so shouldn't be a problem.
But others are still skeptical.
They rush the vaccine. Normally vaccine has a long process and all that, so I'm not really that sure.
Not that keen, huh?
Not that keen, really.
Quite scared also because we have to see our ministers. Let them to try first. If they are okay, then let us take.
Yeah.
Both Colin and Sadev are dispatch riders, and one of their colleagues had just been tested positive. They are among millions of fence-sitters that Coordinating Minister Khairi Jamaluddin is still trying to convince ahead of vaccine rollout this year.
According to a recent KKM survey that was done online, the acceptance rate was 67% keen to take the vaccine. But there are a significant number who are not sure yet. Various communication strategy that we are devising to ensure that people are comfortable when it comes to the safety of the vaccine, when it comes to the efficacy of the vaccine, when it comes to the halalness of the vaccine.
Prime Minister Muhyiddin Yassin will be among the first to be vaccinated when the first batch of vaccines arrive end of February. The country has so far secured enough vaccines for more than 27 million or 80% of its population. The authorities aim to vaccinate 126,000 a day across 600 locations nationwide. Several dry runs were held, including in rural areas, to ensure vaccines that require sub-zero temperature are properly handled.
Now, some 500,000 frontliners will get their vaccines first, followed by the high-risk group, and more than 9 million of them comprising the elderly, the sick, and persons with disabilities. Now, while the rest of the population, for those aged 18 and above, will get their vaccines beginning May this year to February next year.
Registration is scheduled to begin later this week. While it's not compulsory, vaccination is free for both locals and foreigners, including undocumented migrant workers and refugees.
And the principle is very simple. The principle is we need to vaccinate the foreign workers to make sure that they are safe and to make sure that we are also safe.
Malaysia has more than 3 million migrant workers, mainly in plantation, construction and manufacturing sectors. Melissa Go, CNA, Kuala Lumpur.
A survey has revealed that Japanese companies want the Tokyo Olympics to be cancelled or postponed. The poll results deal another blow to the already troubled Games. Tokyo is due to host the world's biggest sporting event in less than 6 months. But the capital remains in a state of emergency after a surge in COVID-19 cases. Michio Ishida reports.
For a few months now, media polls show that around 80% of the public wants the Olympic Games postponed again or cancelled due to the COVID-19 pandemic. But a fresh new survey by think tank Tokyo Shoko Research shows a similar sentiment is shared by 56% of Japanese companies. That's a slight increase from the survey in July last year. Only 7.7% want the Olympic Games held this July. This is not good for Tokyo as the biggest income is expected from corporate sponsors. The second biggest income would come from spectators or tickets. If the Games are held, 37% of surveyed companies think spectators should be limited or with no spectators. The survey covered 11,000 companies conducted for a week in early February. But won't the cancellation or postponement of the Games hurt corporate income? Well, close to 70% of firms say they don't think so. For the new president of the organizing committee, who will replace gaffe-prone Mr. Yoshiro Mori, it will be a great challenge to draw public and corporate support. Election is expected to take place as early as this week. That's as there is no clear sight when the state of emergency on 10 prefectures will be lifted. Michio Ishida, CNA, Tokyo.
Japan's Miyagi and Fukushima prefectures are still without water 2 days after a powerful earthquake hit the region. Authorities are trying to repair a major water pipe that burst because of the tremor. 12 people are seriously injured after the quake, landslides and damaged buildings. Officials have forecast heavy rain and warned the downpour could trigger more landslides. That's especially so in parts where the earthquake has already loosened the ground.
A former South Korean Coast Guard chief has been cleared of negligence over a botched rescue operation during the Sewol ferry disaster 7 years ago. 9 other current and former Coast Guard officials have also been acquitted. More than 300 people died when the ship capsized. Most were students on a school trip. A court ruled that the Coast Guard officials made an appropriate call to issue an evacuation order, but many on board followed instructions from the ship's crew to stay in their cabins as the ferry slowly sank.
Thai Prime Minister Prayut Chan-o-cha and his administration are facing their second no-confidence motion, with Parliament holding a censure debate this week. But a point of contention has come up over references to the monarchy in the opposition's motion. CNA's Saksith Sayasombat looks ahead to the debate.
It's the second time in just as many years that the opposition in Thailand's parliament is taking aim at the government of Prime Minister Prayut Chan-o-cha. This time, 10 ministers, including Mr. Prayut himself, are in the firing line over the course of several days of grilling before a no-confidence vote on each of them at the very end. The opposition accuses the government of malpractice, of corruption, mishandling of the economic fallout of the COVID-19 pandemic, and other failings both personal and political. But one issue that stands out this time in the original motion for the censure debate is the claim that Prime Minister Prayut is, quote, breaking the bond between the people and the monarchy, saying that the government is hiding behind the officially revered institution for its own failures. Anti-government protests from last year calling for wholesale political reforms, including of the monarchy, have continued last week. The government is accused of hitting back with a flurry of charges, including reviving the draconian royal defamation law that criminalizes criticism of the monarchy with up to 15 years in prison, essentially utilizing the law to gag the protesters. 4 activists are now in pre-trial detention, as protesters are threatening more rallies should they not be released this week. And given that it is a highly sensitive subject, there has already been a lot of heated debate whether this issue should be brought up at all in the censure debate or not. Government coalition MPs are unsurprisingly already up in arms about it and have threatened with legal consequences if they don't drop the matter from the censure debate, while others caution the opposition that they're here to grill the government, not the monarchy. But it is very likely that a government will survive the no-confidence vote, as it commands a comfortable majority in parliament. The opposition still claims that it has a, quote, knockout punch ready, but it remains to be seen whether or not they will be able to land a fatal blow against the government. Saksit Sayasombat, CNA Bangkok.
Updating business, Bitcoin has pulled back from a record high as investors took profits from a rally that pushed the digital currency close to $50,000. Other cryptocurrencies also slipped. Now, Bitcoin fell as much as 5.6% to slightly under $46,000. That's after it reached a record peak of about $49,700. It's now down more than 2%. Its rival Ethereum slid more than 8%, but has recovered some. Bitcoin is fast gaining legitimacy as an asset class. It has gained more than 1,100% since hitting a one-year low last March. It jumped 20% in the week since Tesla said it had invested $1.5 billion in a cryptocurrency and would start accepting it as payment. Morgan Stanley's investment arm is also reportedly weighing a bet on Bitcoin. Japanese beverage firm KIRIN Holdings has posted a revenue loss of nearly 5% for 2020. It says it's able to keep the impact of COVID-19 to its business to a minimum. The brewer's normalized operating profit dropped 15% on year as coronavirus closures dented demand for its products. KIRIN is expecting a strong recovery on its beverage business in 2021. It sees its revenue increasing by almost 2% this year, even as more costs are expected. And that's your business update. Back to you, Don.
Liz, thank you very much for that. Total Defence has guided Singapore in its fight against COVID-19 through acts of solidarity, such as people stepping forward as volunteers to help the vulnerable. That's part of the message as the nation marks Total Defence Day.
Despite the disruptions brought about by the pandemic, we demonstrated an undaunted spirit and a confidence that we overcome the pandemic together. The road to recovery could be long and winding, but Singapore can overcome this crisis and emerge stronger than before. As a nation, we stand together in unity.
This year's commemoration event was held at the Singapore Discovery Centre and streamed live on Facebook. There was also an exhibition on key historical events, such as the Japanese occupation. Other highlights included augmented reality games and stories of resilience from previous crises. About 100 youths also took part in an online discussion with Mr. Zaki as they brainstormed ideas to put total defence into action. With more on Total Defence, we're joined now by Samantha Ng. She's from the Advisory Council on Community Relations in Defence. The council was set up by MINDEF to promote better understanding of Singapore's national security. Samantha, tell us a bit more about your work.
So my volunteering journey actually started in 2015 when I joined the Singapore Armed Forces Volunteer Corps. And I think since then, I've also put together some fireside chats and really small group discussion sessions with people from the defense community and young people like myself to help them understand a little bit more about geopolitics, current affairs, and really things that are happening in the world around us.
So tell us more about how Singaporeans, if they want to be a part of this year's commemorations, how can they get themselves involved?
I think total defense is really in what we do every day. And there are many things that young people and families alike can actually take part in. There are many total defense initiatives that are happening right now. We can actually sign up for CPR, AED courses, so that you can take your first step to be a community first responder. There are also workshops on online falsehoods, so we can actually learn to look out for the different types of sources and making sure that we're getting the news from reputable news sources. So these will go a long way in actually making sure that we build up our social and digital defenses, which are also core pillars of total defense, along with civil, economic, psychological defense.
Samantha, you're very right to say that young people need to understand what's going on in the world in order for them to have better perspective about defense. And you yourself, you're a young leader. What do you think the role is of young people in this whole idea of total defense?
I think young people, we are really digital natives. We live in a world where technology is all around us. So that puts young people in a very good place to be able to help others who are less tech savvy stay safe online. I think we play an important role in making sure that we call out things like fake news, really looking out for people who are not as able to discern between the different types of sources and help them stay safe in the online and digital space.
Also, I'm wondering about women, Samantha. Do you see more of them, getting involved, and any specific roles that they're better at playing in?
I think our contributions to total defense shouldn't be defined by our gender. So there are a lot of things that every one of us can do on a day-to-day basis as well, even helping, simple acts like helping others in the community that might need some support. I think we actually see a lot of that in action through the pandemic, where in various pockets of Singapore, we see members of the community stepping up to help neighbours, to help the people around them. And all those go a very long way in helping keep Singapore safe and strong, especially in the midst of crises.
All right, thanks very much for staying past your bedtime, Samantha Ng there from the Advisory Council on Community Relations in Defence. Overcoming the pandemic and emerging from it stronger is the best homage Singaporeans can pay to their forefathers. Education Minister Lawrence Wong has said this at the 54th War Memorial Service. It commemorates civilian victims of the Japanese occupation as well as Total Defence Day.
At some point, the pandemic will pass, and at some point it will be over. At that time, I hope we can look back and say that this has been a defining moment in our history. We have been tested in this crucible, but we have overcome the toughest of circumstances together with resilience and resolve, and we have prevailed and forged a stronger sense of solidarity and unity.
Well, this service is held every year on the day Singapore fell to the Japanese in 1942. 50 representatives, including those from religious organizations, attended the service at the Civilian War Memorial. The event co-organizer Singapore Chinese Chamber of Commerce and Industry also launched an e-book. It tells the stories of the memorial and those who went through the occupation. And that wraps up Singapore Tonight. Headlines anytime at cna.asia.
And you can find us on Facebook, YouTube and Twitter as well. Bye for now.